We're back again, the Unfiltered Family Therapist. I'm here, Dr. Mary, with Jennifer, also another licensed marriage and family therapist. And we decided today we're going to talk about, the things that we're really passionate about, our research and our interests and our focuses in therapy, and some of the things we kind of feel are hobbies in our professions too. So let me start by asking you, Jennifer, um, what are some of the things that really drive you as a therapist, and directions that you really focus on in your work?
Well, for me, I think one of the things is that, I came from a very dysfunctional family with lots of alcoholism, mental illness, abuse, physical, emotional, all those things. And when I was in my teens and 20s, I would go to therapy and I didn't feel like anyone was hitting the mark of what was going on with me. I don't think anyone really fully understood back in the late 80s and 90s about the impacts of trauma on the central nervous system. And I just remember going through life feeling like I was at a rave and everyone else is at a library. And I just could not slow the noise down in my head, so much noise. And on top of that, I'm neurodivergent. So just not just the noise in my head, there's the noise like from the power lines, the noise from the fluorescent lights, all the noise, all the stimulation. I could never focus, I could never settle down, and nobody ever got me in therapy. And for me, when I started becoming a therapist, I really wanted to focus on the impacts of trauma and how it hijacks your central nervous system, how it hijacks your digestive system, how it hijacks your brain, how it hijacks all of that and affects everything that you do. Because it was totally missed when I was doing therapy, and I felt like the therapist was always they were judging me, or they felt like they were like there was a distance between us. Like I felt like they were like, I don't know, the expert, and I didn't know anything about myself. And so when I became a therapist, I always said I wanted to be the therapist that no one ever was for me. I want to feel warm. I want to feel engaging. I want to be your Sherpa along the way because you know yourself the best. I'm the expert on the brain and the body, but you're the expert on you. So I
Yeah,
wanted to be that person that helped you understand why you do the things that you do, how your past impacts you, how much conditioning impacts you, and how that childhood is such a small amount of time, but we spend the rest of our lives trying to get over that.
yeah,
So for me, the effects of trauma on our whole body is my passion. And I want people to understand that they're not crazy, that their responses at some point in their life made sense with the family they grew up in or in the trauma they grew up in. But oftentimes, as we become adults and we grow, that it no longer works for us. And that's where it causes us so much dysfunction.
yeah. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about the direction that you've taken to understand the body plays into trauma, how it gets hijacked.
Well, one of the first therapists that actually got me was a therapist out in Hawaii. I walked into his office and he's like, follow this light bar. And I'm like, what is this voodoo? Why are you having me follow a light bar? This makes no sense. Are you hypnotizing me? And he's like, no, it's EMDR. We're just trying to like change the connections in your brain. And that was the first time I actually felt like I felt better. After 6 months of EMDR therapy, I felt fantastic. I felt like I was no longer self sabotaging my life. I felt like I was just functional. I could get along with people. And it broke that feeling of I walked around my whole entire life feeling like I was not lovable and that there was something inherently wrong with me. And the EMDR changed my life. And I knew at that point, because I was in grad school at the time, I'm like, this is what I want to do. I want to get trained in EMDR. I want to know all about trauma. I want to know all the stuff. So I started following Bessel van der Kolk. I started following Stephen Porges. I started following all the trauma therapists. And, their work just resonated so deeply with me because it just made sense. It just, like you think about, when you are so afraid of your parents or so afraid of the person hurting you, we end up checking out, right? We end up either checking out or hiding or fighting back, but we always do something that keeps us safe. And for me, I was just in that cycle of just safety. I was just in survival mode. And all I wanted to do was like thrive. And EMDR changed my life to put me back into thrive, to be able to thrive for the first time in
Mhm.
my life. So I started
Awesome.
following all the trauma therapists. I got trained in EMDR and it just became my passion. I cannot say enough good things about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you did a certification in EMDR. What is an area that you just can't seem to get enough of? Or maybe there's an author that you still follow today or kind of guides the majority of your work.
Yeah. The polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges, like that man, I feel like he nailed it on the head when he talks about the impacts of trauma on our central nervous system and how it does put us in this whole cycle. And that just resonated so deeply with me because I'm originally a play therapist. That was my original training. And, we would do all this training with kids and how to like access, you know, how to like work with kids and, help resolve their trauma. So when I started doing the polyvagal theory, I started applying every single thing I ever learned about kids to adults because what happens when we are in conflict, when we're like, still in our trauma, we are emotionally stunted to childhood. So I started using all the play therapy techniques with my adults and I started seeing so much more success in how my adults would leave the office and go out there and implement the things in their life. So between the
Nice.
play therapy and between Stephen Porges, those trainings to me were like gold.
Can
Yeah.
you Are you able to share with us some of whenever a therapist goes through training, most of those trainings, conduct some level of experimenting on yourself and
Oh, yes.
processing your
Yep.
own trauma. Can you share a little bit of an experience that you had in any of those trainings that really gives some substance to listeners to
Oh, yeah.
explain
So,
how it
yeah.
works?
So the first time I went to EMDR training, I remember the facilitator said, I just need someone to demonstrate with real quick before we break out into little groups. And I'm like, oh, I'll do it. I'm always like the first one to raise my hand.
Oh yeah,
So I sit down and she starts waving her fingers in front of my eyes. And all of a sudden, I just felt my body just relax. For the first time in my life, I felt myself just be like, wow, I feel like someone just put me on some kind of drug that put me into this feeling of peace. I felt so much peace. We weren't even doing any kind of therapy together. She was just waving her fingers in front of my eyes, and I automatically felt my body just relax. My central nervous system automatically turned off and just relaxed and put me in a, like almost like a trance like state. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. So we broke up into our little groups and they always tell you just pick something like minor, don't get into anything really heavy. But with EMDR, I swear, the minute you pick something minor, it always goes into something heavier. So I picked like this fear of public speaking because I've always had this fear of public speaking. And I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. This trainee over here that's doing it with me, it's going to be easy for her. And all of a sudden, it turned into my childhood stuff. It turned into how every time I would like my parents shared custody of us, and every time I would go back to my mom's house, my mom would put me on the stand about what did they say about me? What did they do? Blah, 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 blah. I'd go over to my dad's and all their family member would be like, what did your mom say about us? And I just learned to shut up because I just didn't know what to say. I always felt like I was saying the wrong thing. So this fear of public speaking ended up being this whole trauma from having two divorced parents who didn't have their shit together.
yeah.
So to me, it was life changing because in that I know we did it for like 30 minutes. In that 30 minutes, I had all these ahas, and my body, seriously, my body has always just been walking around like this. And
Yeah.
everyone's always like, you're such a fast talker. And I just felt myself, my central nervous system felt at peace for the first time in my life.
Slow down.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And I knew from that point, I'm like, this was the right training for me. Yeah.
that's awesome.
Yeah. So now I do these trainings. They're EMDR. Jackie Flynn, what is her name? Jackie Flynn has a group of women that she works with, and she's a play therapist based out of Florida. And she does these amazing advanced EMDR trainings with, I think, Ann Beckley. I can't remember their names. I'm sorry, guys. I'm sorry out there for you guys. Um, you guys are amazing, but I completely am like forgetting the names.
We only have
Um,
so much space up there, right?
yeah, they do these amazing trainings on EMDR with children and all these skills that you use. And I use those same skills with the adults because what are we? We're just hurt little kids
Hmm.
sometimes that we're afraid. We don't want to be vulnerable. We're still just trying to, we show up looking like we're full grown adults, but on the inside, we feel like we're little children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's how those memories are stored and
Yes.
they come with the same emotions. And we have those neural networks that were created when we were kids that we still use today.
Yes. Yes. So all these trainings, she has Marshall Lyles coming in from Austin all the time. And Marshall Lyles does a lot of he does a lot of art therapy and clay therapy and a lot of sand tray therapy. And it's just amazing the amount of healing that can be done just by tapping into therapy with another medium of art.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's
Very cool.
fascinating. Yeah. So,
So that's one of your passions. What other passions do you have? What other areas do you really follow? Or even what are your interests that you're just starting to dig into?
I am big right now on psychedelic assisted therapy. There's so much research out there about the effects of psychedelics on our brain and how it can heal PTSD. It can heal the effects of strokes and everything else that you've ever experienced. So right now, I'm in the process of getting trained in psychedelic assisted therapy. So I'll be able to provide mushrooms. I'm a big believer in plant medicine. I'm not like ketamine. That stuff's great. I love it. I'm not saying anything bad about it, but I'm a big believer in plant made things with no man intervention.
Mhm.
So I'm really big on being able to assist people using psychedelics to help them repair the damage in their brain. And the
Awesome.
reason I do that is because I had COVID back in 2021 and I was sick for like 8 weeks. I was really, really sick. And I came to on New Year's Day and I was trying to go about my day and I ended up having a stroke. And they said it was a COVID related stroke. And my brain for like months felt like a soup sandwich. And it felt like I just couldn't remember anything and I couldn't like just focus or do anything. And I found this training and I found these things and it's changed my life and it's helped my brain repair itself.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I have a big
Um,
passion for it. We have a big, here in Colorado, psychedelics have become legal and starting January 1st. DORA, our governing board, is allowing us to start doing psychedelic assisted therapy. So there's so much community here within the psychedelic community that helps us be able to like network and talk about our experiences together and, have some evidence-based things that show us that how effective it is.
awesome. Is
Yeah.
there a governing entity in Colorado for psychedelic assisted therapy?
Well, DORA is allowing because Oregon actually has had that, I guess, legal for a while. So Colorado DORA is going off of what Oregon's doing, and they're allowing one of the training facilities in Oregon to be one of the license or the governing boards here to be able to take the training through them, to be able to determine what we need to be effective psychedelic assisted therapists.
Very cool.
Yeah.
What are what are some other areas that, when you think about treating somebody, what are some other areas that you think are always really important to include in your work?
Well, besides looking at trauma, we have to look at organic things like, what's up with our brain? Have we had any kind of, brain injuries? Have we had any kind of like strokes? Anything that has happened with our brain that's super important. We have to look at culture too, like what the impact of culture on what we think maybe a maladaptive behavior is not maladaptive in other cultures. So being able to know, what we're looking at, who we're looking at, what they've been exposed to, any kind of trauma, like not just emotional trauma, physical trauma.
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I agree with that.
yeah.
Um, in your family therapy, how do you approach um the inclusion of family members into therapy?
One of the things I like to do is when they first come in, the first couple of sessions, I love looking at how they're seated by each other. You can see a lot of how they sit next to each other, how they support each other. Is the wife on one couch and the husband on the other, and the kids are between them? Are they deferring to the kids for, like, when I ask a question? I give a task, I have them build a house together with bricks. And I like to look at, who's the one directing? Is it the parents, or have the kids taken over? Is one family member more assertive than the other family members? Is it causing fights? So with that information, after a couple of sessions, I move them around on their seating areas. I'll make the kids sit on one couch and the parents sit next to each other. I will adjust the way that they talk to each other. I'll be like, okay, kids, I'm asking the parents this. And I have the parents confer together. I want you guys to problem solve together without the kids. And you
Mhm.
tell me what you think and feel about this. And you'll see the kids start getting louder or acting out. And it's just funny how those family dynamics play out in the office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And when
and
I,
that's so smart. Just shifting where they sit changes
yes.
and activates different levels of comfort and discomfort that changes the patterns that exist in relationships.
Yeah. And one of the first things I do after I do the build a house thing together is I'll ask each family member, how do you think it went? Who do you think um, took over? Who do you think was the biggest, influencer? Who had least of the, had less of a voice? Who felt left out? So I ask these questions so the family starts to realize, oh shit, this is how
Right.
we operate. This is why we have problems. And I
Yeah.
often find the kids are often easier to get them on board. And oftentimes the parents have a harder time breaking those habits because
Yeah.
usually there's a problem between the mom and the dad that people
Yeah.
aren't acknowledging.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we're also
Yeah.
trying to break generational patterns of parenting.
Yeah. Yeah. And often the kids' behavior is a way to create some level of homeostasis. A kid
Yes,
acting up can be a distraction from parents having conflict. It's almost like the kid is trying to save the family by being the louder person in the room when the parents are fighting. They
exactly.
change their focus to the loudest person
Yeah,
instead of
because the
each other.
family, they'll be okay if we ignore, if they ignore that and they focus on us.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And one of the other things I like to do too is I have each family member draw a picture of their family doing something together. And you can get a lot of information from that because, oftentimes you see one sleeping or laying on a couch, right? Or, they're depressed. And that's how the kids draw it as is they're laying down, they're sleeping all the time. Are
Yeah,
you like have a sick child in the family and the child is so sick that, they're not even included in the picture. They're on the backside of the picture, and it's like trying to deal with grief that way too, of having a sick child or a sick family member. You can see so much in the family dynamics by having people draw those pictures.
yeah, that's
Yeah.
awesome. Well, and that's why I love family therapy is it stops looking at people pathologically and
Yep.
starts to look at the patterns that exist in families and trying to
Yep.
understand the function for every dysfunction
Yep.
in those
Everything makes sense
patterns.
in a systems view, right? Like in that
Yeah,
system, your maladaptive behavior actually makes sense because everyone's doing it together.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. The loudest person in the room is not the only problem in the family. Sometimes
Right. But the
it's,
squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? Yep.
yep, yep,
Yep.
exactly. So
Yeah.
that's why I love family therapy. And it also helps remove those pathologized labels like, diagnoses in mental health often create, which makes one person the target problem instead of, no, there's patterns that exist here that
Yeah.
every dyad, every two people contribute to some pattern. And two people
Yep.
contribute to the problem, two people can contribute to the solution.
Exactly. I do have a lot of issues too, because when you're trying to change the dynamic of a family, there's a lot of anger and the anger is directed at me. So I really
Hmm.
have to, remind them that I'm not trying to make you angry with me. I'm not trying to upset you guys. What I'm trying to do is help you break those generational patterns of
Yeah.
families and everything that you brought forward from your own family of origin that doesn't work. We still
Hmm.
keep using. So I'm trying to
Yeah.
help you, reinvent a different kind of wheel that works better in your family so everybody can operate independently and not feel like they have to be people pleasers or feel like they're like agreeing to things that they don't want just to keep, the peace in the family.
Yeah. Well, and really starting from the understanding that everybody's normal within the context of their own lives, but normal isn't always effective.
Right.
So, if you grow up in an environment where this is how we did things growing up, that's a normal behavior. But when you move into another environment, it's no longer effective. So
Yep.
it's so important just to look at it as not abnormal, but just ineffective so that you start to establish more effective interactions.
Mm. How many times do you have family members, like couples that come in and one of the spouses, they had gone away to one of the parents' house, their family of origin's houses, and they come back and the spouse is like, I didn't even know who my spouse was. They turned into this like little like kid that was just
Yeah,
fighting and bickering and all that. But what happens is every time we go home, to our family of origin, what happens? That same dynamic pops out, that same survival skill pops out, and for some reason, we lose the ability to be on our best behavior.
yeah,
And then our spouses are like, what was that? And then
yeah.
the other person that went,
All
that was their family, needs time to like detox from being around the family that made them feel like they were this big.
yeah, all the time.
Yes.
It's crazy. And it's just automatic. I always
Right.
use the example of, when you are 4 or 5 years old and you learn to tie your shoes, it creates a network in your brain. And so, today as an adult, you're tying your shoes, you're using the same network, but you're not thinking about it. It's just automatic. It's very
Right.
mindless. And most of what we do is very mindless. We're just driven emotionally to do whatever we do. And we go into those environments that we grew up in, and emotionally we get hijacked and activate
Yep.
those networks again, and it's not even conscious, it's just a pattern that exists in that family. And so when you address the whole family dynamic, you can actually rewire the brain so that the brain learns, I don't need to use that network anymore. You can, it's called memory reconsolidation. You rewire it and you create a new network that your brain can use, but it's created from the original network. It's not a parallel network, so you still use both networks.
Yes, yes. One of the things I tell my clients is don't buy ice cream from the crazy van. And the crazy van is, the all the things from your past, right? The people that try to get you to engage in their crazy behavior that makes you feel emotionally regressed, right? You keep
Mhm.
engaging with that, you're buying toxic ice cream, and all it's doing is making you feel crazy and it's making you repeat the patterns of the past. So
Yeah,
I tell people, when you grow up, your mom, your dad, your siblings, they teach you how to be in their world. And now as an adult, you have to be able to like not engage with that crazy and be able to teach them how to be in your world. And it's
yeah,
like dog training for humans.
yeah,
It's not engaging, it's being able to like, sit there and reinforce the behaviors that you want from people. But what
yep,
happens is we become so emotionally stunted that we just go right back to being 8 years old.
yeah.
Yeah. And then we
Well,
walk away and we're like, what the hell was that?
yeah. Well, and when we have trauma, our body learns to numb those experiences.
Yes.
So we stop feeling. And, feeling is a chemical reaction in our body based in activation of certain networks. And, when you have trauma, you learn not to even feel that stuff anymore. So learning how to turn that feeling state back on is also a way that you recognize it so you don't get hijacked. You recognize it and go, oh, nope, I'm going to do it this way. This feels better than the old way. And then you start strengthening that new network.
Yeah. But the one thing that we have is that emotional hangover. Anytime we're trying to teach somebody to be in our world differently, we're trying to condition them, we have that
Mhm.
emotional hangover that we have to feel a sense of shame, our guilt, or their response makes us feel really awful. And then they're like, I shouldn't do that. Oh my God, I'm like, this feels really horrible. So it's being able to be your biggest supporter, to tell yourself over and over that I have to condition these people to be in my life or I'm going to be miserable for the rest of my
Yes.
life, or I'm going to avoid them for the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, and when you grow up, a family really teaches you who you are. And
Yeah.
becoming an adult is so much about recognizing I know me better than you know me. And you start to set
Yes.
boundaries around how you'll allow yourself to be treated.
But think about too how much of our identity is based off of the people around us, their past traumas and their faulty
Yes.
thoughts.
Yes.
We are like they're not intentionally trying to hurt us, right? But as
Right.
kids, we never look at our parents and think, what's wrong with you? We look at ourselves
Hmm.
and think, I must be unlovable. I must be inherently fucked up because they wouldn't be
Yeah.
treating me like that if I wasn't. So all
Yeah.
of our inner theme songs that we develop come off of other people's shit.
Yeah.
And we,
And
yeah,
so much of our work is about not throwing family members under the bus, but understanding that, shit rolls downhill, that
yes,
trauma, if you don't address your trauma, it becomes your kids' trauma to carry or unpack. And,
yep.
when we talk about parents in my work, I'll ask them what day on their 18th birthday, if 18 is when you become an adult, what hour on their 18th birthday do all the answers to the universe fall into their head?
Right.
It doesn't. It doesn't ever
Right.
fall into their head. So your parents are actually just grown-up kids. They don't know
Exactly.
everything, but they're trying to create some level of organization and understanding out of the chaos that exists in their own life. But then you add a couple kids to it who don't know shit about how the world works. And
Yeah.
there's a lot of chaos. Most, parents don't generally intend to fuck up their kids, but there's no kid that gets out of childhood without
Right.
baggage. It's still our own
Exactly.
jobs to unpack it.
Right.
So,
Well, and you think about too, like back in my generation, all the parents had kids. They got married out of high school, got
yeah.
married in like 18, 19, 20, had kids, four kids by the time they were like 23. And our
Hmm.
prefrontal cortex doesn't fully develop till we're 25,
Yep.
and that is, so important to be able to make good choices and to understand consequences of things, right? But all these
Yeah.
people are getting married and having kids at ages that they don't even understand themselves, let alone how
Absolutely.
to raise a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think marriage and family therapy also lets you let your parents off the hook. It's okay to hold them accountable for how their behavior continues or ask for help in ways that they need, support from their parents in terms of letting some past go. But for them to also recognize I am not the common denominator for all the problems in my life. It's the patterns that exist in my relationships that's the problem.
Exactly. But I think the biggest takeaway is that we are not bound to all the stuff of our past, right? That we have the ability to recondition our brains, to like change everything in our body, to be able to do things differently and parent differently and love ourselves differently and to do things just differently. It's just
Yeah.
patterns that need to be broken. Those patterns
Yeah.
that kept us surviving in that system, that worked for you back then. It's just being able to know that we can change those things and we can change our future. We can change the future
Absolutely.
of our children.
Yeah. Do you do you have a story, obviously a de-identified story that you can share that's really your favorite summary of, some of your best work, some of your favorite experiences as a therapist?
Oh yeah. So I have I'll say a parent and a parent and a child that come in together. She's an adult child. And the mom had serious sexual abuse. The parent had serious sexual abuse and a lot of trauma growing up and was not the best mom to her young child. She met spouses and partners that would molest her child. She was very emotionally stunted. So this person came in for therapy and she's just like, I just don't understand. And we did a lot of work. And then her parent came to visit. So she's like, can I bring my parent in? I'm like, yes. That person said, can we bring my parent in? And I said, yes. So they brought their parent in. And in that session, I could see the wheels turning in my client's head that, wow, it's not me. It's really my mom. My mom is now 70 years old and she's still emotionally 12. That in this conversation that we were having, she started to realize, she started like putting back where it came from. Like, this wasn't about me. This was about her. She didn't have the ability to protect me. She
Yeah.
didn't have the ability to stand up for herself, let alone for me, let alone me. She chose men that abused her, victimized her, and made her feel like she was a child again, which allowed her own child to be preyed upon. But I saw behavior on the couch. Like you see people sitting differently. You see them,
Mhm.
just their facial expression changing. You see them sitting up, being more confident. And in this session, I saw this person just go from like an emotional child to this full grown adult and tell her mom, like, you know what? I was been mad at you forever, but I can't be mad at you anymore. I forgive you, but I don't want to have a relationship with you because you haven't grown, you haven't changed, and being around you hurts me. And the mom's crying, the mom's having this thing. And, she finally like, we're doing a lot of work together, even with the mom. And the mom looks at me and she's like, I deserve this. I wasn't there to protect her. I'm still, I can just notice now that it's about me. I made this whole session about me. And I just
Mhm.
watched this and I'm like, holy shit, this is like there's so much growth here and so much
Mhm.
understanding. It didn't go either the way that they wanted to, but to see both of them owning their shit, both of them, the daughter saying, I'm not carrying your stuff anymore. I'm
Yeah.
not carrying the weight of your decisions. I'm not carrying the weight of your own thoughts on myself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so awesome. And then when you talk about how a person's body language changes, I always look for um that when something clicks, you see somebody just take this amazingly huge breath and just
Yes.
exhale. And I always think of that as trauma leaving the body. And you
Yes.
and you can see their whole body change. They just let that go, and it removes
Yes.
so much tension in their body that's existed since those experiences
Yes.
were wired
Yawning
there.
too. Yawning's a release of emotion. And
Hmm.
sometimes you'll see somebody yawning a million times, but after like the 10th yawn, you just see their shoulders drop, their body just rise, and they're just sitting in this position of confidence.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
that's what
I
I love
love
about
that.
EMDR because there's so many different phases in EMDR that you can see that you're going through as you're actively doing the EMDR session. And you'll see people go into child's pose where they're just kind of
Hmm.
crunched down and like that. And by the end of the session, or by the end of 6 sessions, they're sitting upright, and they're like, I feel good. And you can see like their faces change. They came in looking so worried and so stressed. And after a while they just look like 10 years younger.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
It's so amazing to be a part of that journey for people.
Absolutely.
Yeah, to
What
be that
are,
Sherpa.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and just before we started recording, you and I were talking about how we're both happy criers, and definitely, those when somebody tells me their worst experiences, I don't get engaged in the sadness of it, and partly because the way I think about trauma, but I love those happy stories.
Yes.
When you see the trauma leave their body and it happens in an instant, that's when I definitely get choked up because I love getting to be a part of that.
Yeah. Well, on the flip side of that, when people come in and tell me their story for the first time and they're crying, I will look at them and I'd be like, I understand that you are sad, but what happened to you is infuriating. It is so upsetting and it was so fucking wrong that this was done to you. And
Hmm.
to see that realization that, wow, that was wrong. I'm not just imagining this,
Hmm.
to be sit there and like to give somebody that validation that they were like totally wronged and
Hmm.
that they feel this way for a reason is so empowering to like watch someone say, wow, you
Hmm.
agree with that? I'm like, yes, I do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting because my work, which is really based in, neuroscience, applied neuroscience, neuropsychotherapy, but also so much of rapid resolution therapy, which is really about, how we talk about trauma. And so somebody will come in and they'll say, this happened to me. I really try not to engage with it as if it's happening again. So in my mind, if I say, yeah, I I'm mad about that too, that never should have happened to you, that's really me interacting with it as if it's happening again. So I don't really engage that way. I'll say, let's clear that up,
That's good.
because
Yeah.
that my goal is always to move, um, get the brain to disengage with it as if it's happening and start to recognize the concept of time, which is also
Yes.
survival, that that moment doesn't exist anymore, and what is, am I okay right now?
Yeah. I do
And
that when there's like, my approach is when I see a lot of shame, right? People telling their story
yeah,
for the first time, that they're embarrassed, they're horrified, they're shame, and they feel like they've done something wrong. To be able to acknowledge that, no, there's nothing wrong with you. There's a lot wrong that was done to you, but there's
yeah,
nothing wrong with you. And that's
yeah,
when you start seeing people like lift their bodies up and being like, I'm not defective.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. People say I'm so broken because of it. And I'll say, can you show me the cracks? Or they'll say
Yeah.
I'm shattered. Can you show me the pieces? Because, the research shows the way that we talk about it also increases the chemical activations in our body that reactivate trauma versus
Yes.
deactivate it. So when we say
Yes.
I'm broken, we feel more broken
Yes.
instead of, show me the pieces. They start to disagree with themselves. Um, that causes the mismatch between
Yeah.
what we predict and what occurs. If we don't have a mismatch, we don't change the wiring in our brain. So we have to help
Yeah.
people disagree with themselves, but it's really a matter
Yes.
of giving them the tools that challenge. Are you broken? I see a whole person
But
here.
there's such beauty in broken glass. When you look at broken glass, right? People collect broken glass and they make mosaics. They make
Sure.
stained glass. They do all these things. So, helping them realize that there's beauty in the brokenness and you're not broken. You just need to
Hmm.
put the pieces together a little bit differently.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and that's brain based too. It's just really
Yes.
getting the person to interact with those memories differently.
Yeah. All my clients are like, God, you're really good at reframing that.
Yeah,
And I'm like,
totally.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're really good at telling yourself a story that isn't true. And I'm,
Hmm.
here to like lead you to tell you that, your story is based on other people's shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
What
let's
is what
recreate
is
your
your
story.
yeah, what is your monkey reference about throwing shit?
Oh, you never throw shit at a monkey because they throw shit back at you.
Right.
Yeah. It's like you
Yeah.
can't argue with a monkey because monkeys are so dysregulated. They don't have a full, like, evolved brain. So you try to argue with the monkey, they're just going to take their shit and throw it at you. And then you're going to throw it back and they're going to throw it at you. And next thing you know, you're in a full on argument with a monkey that doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah, even if
It's
it's
not based
another
on any
person.
logic.
Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah.
our experiences, our history is so much about, what got wired into our brain that
Yeah.
that we don't even know. And we're having an argument with a monkey, which is
Yeah.
stuck in our minds that
Yeah.
somebody else put there.
When we go into fight, flight, or freeze, we go into our reptilian monkey brain, right?
Yeah.
That very primitive brain that we're not using logic. It's all emotion. It's all like, let's protect ourselves.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So we all turn into a monkey at some point.
Right.
Yeah. And we'll
Yeah.
die on that bridge.
Yeah. And eventually we have to learn just to not engage with the monkey, but it's an
Yeah.
emotional response. It's a mindless, it's learning how to mindlessly do that by rewiring our
Yes.
emotional brain. There's nothing
Yes.
cognitive about it.
Right. And that monkey can be yourself. That monkey can be a sibling. That monkey can be a spouse.
Hmm.
They could be a parent. But we have to remember that everyone goes into monkey brain at some time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So,
Well,
don't
so
argue with primitive brains.
yep. No shit. Um, what are your goals for the future as a therapist, as a professional?
I love what I do. I love, my ultimate goal was to go into private practice, which I did. I had a group practice at one point. I went back down to just being by myself. And I really think that my passion now is to teach and train other people how to be the best therapist possible for your people. To go out there and spread all this knowledge, to be the one that can help people in supervision to like be able to recognize their own blind spots when it comes to like, therapy, when it comes to like, transference with your clients, being able to like not project your own stuff. So I want to be able to like be that person for other therapists that can help you grow into like the best possible therapist you can be. And
Yeah.
it's a constant evolution. We get to one point and there's just so much more that we're going to learn. There's so much research that changes throughout, our time that, to be that person that helps people evolve and to
Yeah.
evolve myself. I'm always learning from my clients. I'm always learning from trainings. I'm always learning from my other therapists around
Hmm.
me.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for those listening, supervision in this discussion is just to explain that a little bit. Therapists are required, if they don't have training in a specific area in therapy, they're really required to have some training or seek some supervision with somebody that does have training and experience in a topic. So it's called supervision. But it's just a way to connect with others that can really teach you how to effectively interact with those topics and your clients.
Yeah. And also supervision for students who are like in the process
Mhm.
of getting their master's and doctorate degrees have to go and they have to meet with licensed therapists to be able to like take their caseload and discuss it, to see what they're doing, to see how to expand their ability to provide services to them.
Yeah, and to get your license, um, every field in mental health has to have a certain number of hours in order of supervision in order to get their licenses.
Yeah. I just saw a meme about like who's the grand poopa of like the therapist, right? Like who does the therapist go for the therapist? Who does that therapist go for their supervisor? So who's the
Hmm.
grand poopa of all of the therapists? I want to see that
Right.
therapist.
Right. Yeah. Well, and there's nobody that can know everything. So there can't be,
Yeah.
even somebody that thinks they're the top dog needs supervision from somebody else about
Exactly. We're all
something.
just evolving constantly.
Yeah.
We're all like, as we go through different phases of our own lives personally, it affects
Hmm.
our way that we do therapy. It affects who we work with. It affects what we do. And we have to make sure that our own personal stuff doesn't get involved in
Yeah.
the way that we do therapy. So we have to
Yeah.
be aware of our blind spots. We have to be aware of the things that, will trigger us. We are
Yeah.
just humans. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's that transference that Jen just talked about, you know, really being able to be aware of, when am I being hijacked by something that, my client said that triggered me, being able to be aware of that so we don't drive our clients in a direction that protects us versus addresses their issue accurately to them.
Yeah. And oversharing, there's so many therapists that will overshare. Now, I tell stories about my own personal experience
Hmm.
when I know it will benefit my client. When I see them
Right.
stuck and, they need to know that they're not alone, I will tell some stories. But for the most part, we just can't be sharing things willy-nilly. It's
Hmm.
inappropriate. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're kind of
Yeah.
ruining that therapist client like relationship.
Yeah.
You know.
Stories are important because it does help clients receive some exposure to it, but it's indirect exposure, um, which helps disengage a person's limbic system from fight, flight, freeze. If you say you should look at it this way, that gets somebody to engage with their limbic system. But when you share a story, and then apply it to your client, that helps them hear the story and see how that
Yes.
plays out. But then, indirectly, they get to experience how that might look differently. So, but self disclosure as a therapist, there's times when that's helpful, but it's not always helpful. So you always have
Yeah.
to weigh the value of that.
Yeah. Am I telling this story because it hits my emotions, or am I telling the story because I know it would be helpful to them?
Right.
Yeah, two different reasons, right? I need to tell this
Yep.
story just for the sake of talking because I'm just reminded of something that happened to me, or am I
Yeah.
doing this to show them, like, look, you're not alone. This is a very common thing that happens to people. It's even though it happens, it's not healthy.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And an important part of that is helping your clients know I am a person. I'm not some authority on everything in life. So offering elements of, I'm not perfect. I've experienced this. This is how I looked at it. That can be helpful just to maintain a sense of uh, equality,
Yes.
that we're equals. I'm not
Yes.
smarter or better than you. And for so many people, that's so important to feel like they're equals with other people. They're not
Yeah.
less than because of their experiences.
Well, that's why I said, like in the very beginning of our session here, I was talking about how when I went to therapy in my 20s, I always felt like the therapist acted like they knew better or they were like on a
Yeah.
whole different level. And I'm like, I need to feel like you get me, that we're like two people in someone's living room having a conversation.
Yeah.
You know, I know myself best. You're just trying to help me see my blind spots. And it felt
Yeah.
like there was like a big power differential. And I felt almost like people were judging me, like the therapists that I chose were judging me, or they knew better, or there was like this big giant feeling of disconnect. They weren't very personable.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my experience going to therapy as a kid, um, that was absolutely what I needed because I had so many people in my life that were, treating me like I was a bad kid. I was a bad kid. And this was somebody that's like, hey, there's other ways to look at this, that, you're not the cause of all these problems, and
Yes.
helped point out ways that other people had contributed to problems in my life. And that got me out of that need, um, to try to be, um, there was always this need to not, just to find somebody who didn't think I was bad.
Right.
And
Yep. And
and
I
she
think,
was that person.
yes, I think back in the 80s and the 90s, we had like, you think about psychoanalytics, right? Sigmund Freud, right?
Yeah,
There
yeah,
was that element of that therapist knows everything and you're just in
yeah.
there to like
The
deload,
hierarchy.
right? Yeah. So I think in the 80s and the 90s, the general feeling was like if you were in therapy, if you were a kid in therapy, you were the problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why I love family therapy so much, is that it does, remove the labels and
Yes.
and starts to look at the patterns that exist. Every time I work in a family, I let everybody know you're all 100% normal within the context of your own life. That means your experiences, the wiring in your brain tells you I am correct in how I look at this. But in any, doesn't matter how many people are in the family, but if I'm working with a couple, I will make sure they both know you're both 100% correct at how
Yes.
you look at a problem. It's not that either one of you is the cause of the problem. The problem is the pattern that exists between you, and you both contribute to the pattern. So if our goal is to change the pattern, it's just a matter of understanding, how do I contribute to the pattern? Because a pattern is sustained by two people, but it's changed by one. And it changes
Yes.
faster when it's changed by two.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yep.
changing the pattern is the goal. We're not changing people. The decisions that we make in therapy
Yes.
to change are our own because we understand our contributions to it.
Yeah. And I tell everyone when they come in, I'm like, be prepared. When you're in therapy, everyone else around you isn't. So it's going to change your relationships. It's going to change things about it's not going to change you. It's going to change the way that you empower yourself, the way that you set boundaries. And it's going to change everything. And some people might not like that,
Yeah.
and they're going to push against it because everybody wants to go back to homeostasis, the way things
Yeah.
were.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even
And
chaos is predictable.
yes, it is. Yeah. And when you're the one changing everything, you're often like feeling like you're like the black sheep. People
Yeah.
look at you and like, what's wrong with you? Now you're not fitting in, or now you don't want to do this. Well, that's a problem because that's how we do things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So I tell
Yeah.
people all the time when they come in, be prepared for things around you to change. And
Yeah.
it might not feel good for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. But nothing's ever changed by being the same.
Yep. Einstein's definition of insanity is
Yes.
doing the same
Yes.
thing over and over and expecting a different
Exactly.
result. It just means
Yeah.
we have to do something different.
Yep.
When you see your partner and you start from a position of they are also correct, then it doesn't mean you're wrong. It means you suspend your perspective so that you can see how they're also correct. And then
Yes.
you start making a plan for what do we want to do with it.
Yeah.
Clients so often talk about, well, you do this and I do this, and this is what it means to me. And that's all impossible. We can't unbrush our teeth, right? And so we can talk so much about what's impossible, but if we never move to what is
It's
possible, we
possible.
don't ever make a plan for what are we going to try first.
Yes. Yep. I
And
always have that hula hoop of fire, right? Like we have to jump through that hula hoop of fire in order to like, we have to feel the heat. We have to feel, but it's not going to burn us, right? When you
yeah,
jump through that hula hoop of fire, it's going to be uncomfortable because you're afraid of the flames. You're going
yeah,
to feel the heat. But on the other side is where change occurs. You
yeah,
can go around the hula hoop of fire, but what are you doing? You're avoiding
yeah. You're avoiding
conflict. You're
the
being,
accurate problem.
yes, you're like becoming a people pleaser. You're doing everything to keep the problem the same.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
And I have
Well,
so many people who come in that are like, I have this, I have that, I'm depressed, I'm this. And I'm like, it doesn't matter, we don't have to pathologize anything, right? You are feeling this way because at some point it worked and it's no longer working. So I like to take away the labels to help people realize that you are not your label. You are just a product of what you came from. And we can break that and we can, you can still be depressed right now, but still make the changes that you need.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it works a lot faster when you have more people involved that, as a therapist, I'm always looking for what's called collateral information. Because when I work
Yes.
with one person, they can come in and tell me whatever shit they want to tell me. But when there's somebody else in the family, or even a friend or a coworker, it doesn't matter, whatever the relationship is, other information applies clearer context to a problem. So that allows
Yes.
me to hold everybody accountable for their contribution to a pattern versus just going with what
Yes.
one person tells me.
The collateral information is everything that you get together by the people, the way they sit, the way they talk, the way they
Yep.
facial expressions, their body language, their tone of voice, the way they
Yeah.
interact with people. Everything is collateral
Yeah.
information.
Yeah. I'll work with a couple and he'll say, I'm not mad. And then I meet with his wife and she's like, he's so mad. He yells all the time. And he may not even recognize it's yelling.
Yes.
But to her, she hears it that way. And
Yes.
who's correct? Both of them. It could just be her perception of it, but he also thinks he doesn't, and maybe that's not true. So you get to some element of
Yes.
integration between two realities. He may need to soften how he communicates, and
Yes.
she may need to build tolerance. Maybe she grew up in a family where they didn't talk about problems, so
Yeah.
she has to build her tolerance for
Yeah.
addressing uncomfortable topics. So
Yeah. Well,
there's
when you
always that.
have somebody too that is kind of louder, right? They may not be yelling, they're loud and their body language says, I have this power of like the sense of authority. You have to look at the person too and what happens to them. Do they become childlike? Do they
Yeah,
go into a child position? Do they start to look like they're in a sense of shame?
yeah,
I have a full length mirror that I have in my office that when that dynamic happens, I pull it out. I'm like, look at you. What do you see? Look at you. What do you see?
yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
when I had my office also, I would do the same thing. Does that look like a mad face? And
Yeah.
absolutely, those people would look in the mirror and say, "Oh, it does kind of look like I'm mad."
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
Or the ones
but
with poker faces. Like if you have a poker face, people can't read you. And when those ambiguous situations, people put meaning to it according to their past and what they've
yeah,
experienced with people who've had poker faces.
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and so often in society, the person that yells gets pathologized as the biggest problem.
Yes.
But sometimes people yell because there's been a pattern of learning not to trust that my partner will listen to me because they just shut down and
Yes.
disengage. So what do people do when we're not listened to? Most people raise their voice so that they're
Yeah.
heard. It's mindless. There's nothing intentional about
Yep.
it,
And we
but
beat
those
a dead
patterns that
horse.
exist. Yes.
Yep.
So when
Yep.
I work with two people, I have to make sure that this person is also willing to learn how to listen and engage with conflict, which makes it easier for this person to soften and learn that they can be heard.
Yes. Yes. Right
So,
on. Yep.
yeah. Well, so I think that's good for the day. We'll pick up here where we left off next week and talk a little bit about my work, and maybe we'll get another token fruit fly. We missed it today. I don't know where he went. I might
Mine
have
are
killed
flying
him.
around too. I don't know if you can see them, but I'm always
Oh,
like
did
going
you
like this.
get
Yeah, people must think I'm crazy sometimes.
it?
I'm like this.
Right. You
I'm like,
got the
there's really a
token fruit
fly.
fly
I'm always
today.
like,
So he moved to your house.
yes.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
cool. So we'll pick this up next week. Thanks for
Before we
sharing
go,
that
I just
today.
want to give a shout out to Dr. Boyles here. I always say your name wrong, Dr. Bowles. Mary. I have my way of pronouncing things other people do not. So Dr. Mary just walked and completed her PsyD, her doctorate in psychology, and she formally walked across the stage this past Friday. So I just want to say a huge congratulations to her for like completing such a huge task and being able to be as awesome as she is. So
Awesome.
congratulations, Dr. Mary.
Thank you. Thank you. I finished it a year ago, but commencement happened to
Yes.
fall the
So she
week that we
officially
went
walked
to.
this Friday. So
Yeah.
she is officially done and got her
Yeah.
everything that she needed. And she's done officially a great job and she's amazing.
That's
So
awesome. Thank you. And
congratulations.
and
Yes.
my husband surprised me with Jen and 11 other friends who showed up to surprise me, which just meant the world to me. It was amazing.
You
And
deserved it.
I appreciate it so
You
much.
earned it, woman. You earned it. You should be
Thank you.
so
I
proud of all
did.
your accomplishments.
I'm pretty proud of it. So I
Yes.
appreciate
Yes.
that. Thank you so
Yeah.
much.
You're welcome. Everybody have a great week. Be your best. Be curious. Remember,
Yeah.
everything that you're doing is just breaking bad habits that worked for you at some point. So instead of
Yeah.
being angry, instead of being emotional, be curious.
Yeah. You are normal within the context of your own
Yes.
lives, but normal isn't
Yes.
always effective. The goal is just to
Yes.
be effective, not more normal.
Normal is relative compared
Yeah.
to what you came from.
Yeah. And normal's only average. Let's not be
Yes.
average.
Yes. Be an outlier.
That's right.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll see you next week, Jen.
See you next week. Bye.